I have a big passion for documentaries. I think there's the way that documentary movies have like evolved during the last 10, 15 years is just amazing. There's so many great documentaries out there, and there's a lot of great documentary directors who really wants to use sound as a very big part of the storytelling. And it's really a great time for us as sound people to be part of this development. I feel that documentaries now are, I mean, some of the best ones are incredibly cinematic. I mean, sometimes way more cinematic than fiction films are. And the way that the directors approach sound is to really use it as an important part of the film. So yeah, I love working on documentaries. I also love working on a lot of other kinds of films, but I must say that I really feel that documentaries are a wonderful place for us as sound people to really shine and really do great work.
Yes. Maybe I thought before we go into the documentary details, you might have a little introduction to yourself. How long are you doing? What are you doing? And
My name is Peter Albrechtsen. I'm a Danish sound designer and mixer. I graduated from the Danish Film School back in 2001, so I'm getting old, I guess. I've always been working both on documentaries and on fiction films, both on Danish, Scandinavian, and international films. Nowadays, I mostly do international films, actually. But yeah, always moving back and forth between the different types of movies. Yeah, I'm based in Copenhagen, but travel a lot and do a lot of international projects.
yes, that's how I know you. It's hard to get you. It's really nice to have you here today. I would love to talk about Foley in a doc film. And I know you got some nominations for your sound works on documentaries, for example, The Cave or The Territory, I remember. What's usually people ask, it's a documentary, so why should there be any sound work at all? The sound is how it is.
The reason that there's a lot of sound work in documentaries is that the sound has to feel real, which I know will make some people say, but is it real when you do so much afterwards? But yes, I actually feel that it's more real. I think this idea of like sound for a film being very real when it's just recorded while the camera is shooting is kind of a misunderstanding in a way, because the thing is that like the way that we as human beings listen to the world is not the same way as a microphone is listening to the world. A microphone, usually on documentaries, it's very often like a microphone on the camera and a few radio mics on the people that is in the movie. And sometimes there's a boom, but very often it's like a very, very basic microphone setup. And this means that the microphones are not recording actually the natural sound of it. It records some voices, and then it records whatever a microphone records when it's put on top of a camera and it's 10 meters away from the people in the picture. So the sound is often very sketchy, very noisy, and the voices are the only thing you hear from the people who is in the image. And that's not the way that we hear the world. We hear the world with all the sounds from the people all the time. I mean, we're not just hearing voices and nothing else. We're hearing human beings and human bodies moving. We're hearing the environments, and we should hear things around the people, and we should hear how their shoes sound when they move, and we should hear how their cloths sound when they move. And we want to have the feeling of being there with the people in the film. And we are not with the people in the film if the only thing we hear is a voice and some rattling wind in the microphone. So for me, putting sound on documentaries is really making it more real. It's making it more like if the audience was there themselves. The contrast to that is something like, for example, a reportage on TV news. That's always just a microphone on a camera and not much else. And it's so noisy, it's so kind of rattling, it's so distorted. And it actually means that I think as human beings, when hearing sound like that, then we're kind of cut off from it. We get a little numb. We don't feel like we're there. We're just looking at something that's happening in front of the camera. And of course it can be disturbing or moving also, but it's not really, the feeling that you get isn't like you're there. The feeling is like you're watching this through a camera. And the great documentaries for me are the movies where I feel like I'm there. And that really happens through the sound, by making the sound feel real for the moment, real for the characters, real for the audience. This is not to say that the sound shouldn't be gritty or cannot be dirty or because I think that's actually often a big thing of making something feel real. It is that all the sounds are not recorded acoustically perfect. I mean, some sounds are kind of off, things are a little dirty and so on. But the level of detail is what brings you closer to the characters. So even if it's kind of rough and dirty, then this thing where you that you hear the body, that you hear the characters, that you feel like you're in the environment with people, it really makes a big difference. And I often feel that it really helps the emotional power of the story if it is a little gritty, if it is a little dirty, if it is a little distorted, or if the footsteps are not recorded properly, maybe a little with a little off mic or things like that. It all makes it feel real in a way, but it can be gritty and very present at the same time. And I feel that what happens when, in a TV news thing, is that it's just rough and trashy.
You're missing the details.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's a big difference there, but it's not to say that the sound should be clean or perfect. It's really about the texture of the sound and the feeling of the sound, and it has to feel like you're there. It has to feel like you're actually, that you can touch the characters that you see.
That's actually a really good part you mentioned. So this is, you sometimes have in a fiction film, you have situations like that as well. So as we as a Foley artist are asked to do some microphone touching movements, like scratching on the cloth, on the body, to make it feel like we are there and it's a live recording and it's really actually happening at that time. So it's this Blair Witch Project feeling, like having a rough sound, but it's perfectly designed, and to have the details, as you mentioned, to have these body movements, footsteps, which brings us to the part of Foley in the documentary. Because I guess it's a big misunderstanding to say it's a documentary, we don't need Foley.
You should say the opposite. It's a documentary. You will need Foley.
Thank you for
I think Foley is such an incredibly important part of the documentary, because it makes the characters feel real. And it's, I mean, also now when like it's nowadays it's even like you can get all this software that cleans up the voice and kind of makes it more present. And I just recently did this American documentary with your amazing Foley sounds, Martin. And like one of the things that I felt for, like there was a lot of kind of scenes where people were talking inside of a cabin, like talking with each other, sitting on couches. And the recording was really bad, but we got it cleaned up with like some of these new AI noise reducing tools that's out there. And the voices sounded good, but suddenly you could just feel like how much you just missed physicality of the characters. It was kind of like they suddenly had morphed into only voices and nothing else. And just getting cloth sounds from Foley was such a big help in making these characters come alive. Suddenly it felt like it was human beings and not just like voices.
Yeah, it feels like you are not looking at a screen, but you are looking at people talking and acting or being there and telling about their story. Yeah.
I want to feel them being there. I don't just want to hear their voice. I want to hear like the full body of their presence.
Yeah.
And I think great Foley can do that. And it's amazing how, I mean, sometimes like you like a cloth track is something that can be quite subtle sometimes, and sometimes it's like in some movies it might not have a big effect for the cloth sound, but it was so important. It was just like, whoa, this, like suddenly like they came alive, and that's just one small sound, and it's something that where you're so dependent on that being performed by a Foley artist who actually goes into the characters and thinks about like, okay, so how does it sound when these people move, and how do we make that feel right? I mean, because it's not, you can't just like add a little noise of some rustling cloth. It has to be performed so that it feels like it's there with the characters, and it's a part of the presence of the people in the film.
Like it's always been there.
Exactly. Yeah. You can do a lot of character building with Foley, as we all know, like the way that the way a door creaks or a chair creaks, or the way someone gets up off a couch, or how much is the floor creaking, and all these things. And I feel that when you have your recordings from the shoot, and you kind of like, you see how it is, and you also hear some of these, I mean, sometimes those recordings from the production are then really bad, or I mean you can't really hear exactly what's happening, but you can hear that the floor has a creak perhaps, and like all of these things, building that in Foley so that it feels like you're actually there with the different props and with the different in the different environments that these characters live in. I think that's a really big part of like setting the mood and setting the feeling of an environment and creating character. I think it's for me, that's always been one of the wonderful things about Foley as well, is this way that Foley can enhance or build kind of the feeling of a room. So it's not just how a character is moving, but it's also like what kind of props, what kind of things, what kind of floor, what kind of things around the character is part of like shaping the character. And it can be with so many different things. You can make the floor really gritty, and that can be a part of kind of like establishing that this person might live in a place where they don't have much money, but the floor is creaking, it's gritty, it's and you can see that in the picture, but by kind of enhancing that through the sound, it makes it more present, and it makes it more like you're actually there experiencing it. And I think it's a very big part of the atmosphere in any kind of like documentary environment. And of course it's also like that in a fiction film, but in a fiction film you'll kind of like build that from nothing in a way. Whereas I feel that something that is very important for me in a documentary is that we build on the world that's there. We build on the emotions that's there. We build on the locations you see, but then we build on that in a way where we highlight all the all the locations in a way where it feels like we're present there, and you do all that through Foley, and can often be in very subtle ways, but it just creates this presence of being there. The way that Foley can help guide the eye to look at an image in a specific way, because that's also something that I feel Foley is very good at. Like when you put up your camera and you record shoot a scene, and you have 5 different people walking around in a kitchen, then it'll be like in the raw sound. But then with the Foley, you can actually point out specific things. Okay, so we want to hear the boy taking a knife, cutting through a bread, like grabbing a glass, feeling it, touching it slowly, taking a sip of the glass. If you kind of have a picture where you see 5 different people, but you hear the Foley of this person together with this roughness of like the different people moving, but if these Foley sounds for this one person are very specific and very precise, then that's the place where the audience will look. So I feel that often in documentaries, like that's something that I think a lot about. Like, okay, so if I see an image, where do I want the people to look? Also because when doing documentaries, the sound budgets are not as big as when you're doing a fiction film, so you cannot put Foley on everything. You kind of need to, or that's how it is quite often, you kind of have to select, okay, so spot the different places where you want the Foley. And what I often feel is happening is that I look at a scene and then I'm thinking like, okay, so what are the sounds, or what are the parts of this scene that I want the audience to look at, and then that's the stuff that the Foley will be doing, because the Foley will highlight the action that's happening, even though it can be very subtle action. But when Foley is highlighting these things, that is where the audience will be looking. So the sound of the Foley guides the eye. Foley is a very big part of documentary sound design for sure, because it is, I mean, it's making things feel real. But I feel it's also actually like when the directors that I really love to work with on documentaries, they often are also looking for places where, where it's not about reality, but it's about the character's reality. So it's about creating an emotional moment with a character. So we're not necessarily hearing all the background sounds. We're not necessarily hearing all the effects but I feel that almost always for those kind of moments, you always hear the Foley, because the Foley is what, if you take away all the other sounds and then have the Foley there, it creates this amazing poetry, because it means that you, as an audience, you totally zoom into this character and just experience what that character is experiencing. And because the Foley is performed, because the Foley sounds natural, because the Foley, is very organic, it really feels real. But you can actually strip away so much of that stuff that's happening around the Foley and really create a very intimate, poetic moment. And I often experience that in the films I'm working on, that creating those kind of vacuums almost, where there's very few sounds, but the Foley is almost always there to create that feeling of it being real. So that's also something that is great with Foley, that Foley can make something feel real, but it can also create a poetry in any given moment. That's one of the amazing things you can do with sound in a documentary, also in a fiction film. But in a documentary, because the setting is real, it kind of feels real immediately. Whereas in a fiction film, you have to make it feel real. It's fake from the beginning. In a documentary, it's real from the beginning, and then you can make it feel even more real. And that's something that I also really love about working on documentaries, this thing that you have real material that you then make even more textured and touching and alive. And it's very much through the sound that you create that feeling of closeness and presence. But that you as an audience see something that you feel is real from the beginning also actually opens up for using sound, I feel sometimes, in a more creative way, because you've already established that this is real, and then the sound can help you highlight something in a way where it's almost unreal. But it's the feeling is that it becomes extra real, extraordinary real. And it's that effect is something that Foley is so good at, because it's natural and organic, and it kind of can make what already feels real super real.